Right, Conscious by Wilfred Owen. I'm going to read through and explain this poem. His fingers wake and flutter up the bed. So immediately we're cast into a soldier waking up. The title Conscious meaning awake. His eyes come open with a pull of will. That's interesting, isn't it? Pull of will. He has to really make a conscious effort to open his eyes, an effort of will, a pull of will, helped by the yellow mayflowers by his head. That's interesting too, isn't it? It's, looking at the beautiful mayflowers, and that's enabled him to open his eyes. When he was writing in a letter on the 8th of May 1917 from the casualty clearing station after he'd suffered, Wilfred Owen had suffered a very bad bout of shell shock. He'd been blown up into the air and landed up in the body remains of someone he knew. He said in the letter, "Meanwhile, I have superb weather, sociably possible friends, great blue bowls of yellow mayflower, baths and bed ad lib." So he himself woke up probably in a similar situation to this and saw some mayflowers by his bed after suffering shell shock. So we could really think that this poem is very much sort of based on his real experience, and although he's writing in the third person, in other words his and he rather than the first person I, he's actually probably talking about himself, and we'll perhaps think about why he doesn't write it in the first person a bit later on. The blind cord drawls across the windowsill. Notice that verb, drawls, personifying the blind cord, making it a person. It's drawling, almost like it's drunk. The sound, it's kind of rather sinister sound, isn't it? So we're aware that he's waking up, but the world isn't the same as it was earlier on. What a smooth floor the ward has. What a rug. So he's looking around, and you could guess, couldn't you, that he's seeing how smooth the floor is, in contrast to the trench, perhaps where it was all muddy and unpleasant. What a rug. Everything seems very pleasant and nice. Who is that talking somewhere out of sight? So he's disturbed, isn't he, by other voices. So we clearly now get a picture of someone who's not he's really suspicious and perhaps full of a sense of panic. 3 flies are creeping round the shiny jug, so he's noticing every little detail, isn't he? And there's a suggestion that they're disturbing him, the flies. "Nurse! Doctor!" "Yes, all right, all right." So he shouts out, and now we realise that this person isn't well, in some sort of way, probably not mentally well. But sudden evening blurs and fogs the air. So he now feels darkness coming upon him, the evening coming upon him. And this again is based on his own experience. He wrote to his mother in August 1912, "Sudden twilight seemed to fall upon the world." It's an image that sort of seems to grip him. That actually is referring not to the war. In 1912, of course, he wasn't fighting the war, he was living in Reading, and he had a difficult time working in a vicarage there, and he really lost his religious faith in Reading. You know, we can get a sense that this is not only about war, this is about a loss of faith in reality, in the way in which the real world seems to be pleasant and nice, but actually hidden behind it is a darkness and an unpleasantness. There seems no time to want a drink of water. Nurse looks so far away, and here and there music and roses burst through crimson slaughter. So now we get a sense of his mental state, that we realise in these lines that he's mentally ill. And notice the rhyme of water and slaughter there. It's a very powerful rhyme, isn't it? he doesn't have time to get water. He's obviously thinking that he's in the wartime. He's in the trench, and he doesn't have time to get it. So he's sort of lost his sense of where he is, and that music and roses burst through crimson slaughter. Now that's a very kind of mysterious image, isn't it? It's what we might call a rather surreal image. This idea of like you know, the music suddenly singing out of crimson slaughter. Crimson meaning sort of a red, blood red slaughter, death. So he's seeing music suddenly bursting out of bloody death and killing. Again, we get a sense of someone who's very mentally disturbed there. He can't remember where he saw blue sky, so he's now losing all sense of perspective. He's now losing a kind of a grip on reality. The trench is narrow, and now we learn he's back in the trench. Even though he's in the hospital, his mind is still in the trench. He's suffering from shell shock, or what we call now post-traumatic stress syndrome, where he's having these flashbacks, isn't he? He's cold, yet hot, and there's no light to see the voices by, so he's back in the trench, and he's shivering, but he's also feverish. He's cold and hot. There's no time to ask. He knows not what. There's no time to ask, and he's lost a kind of sense of what he needs to be asking for, which earlier on was clearly wanted a drink of water, but he's now lost all sense of perspective, hasn't he? He's lost all sense of reality, and he doesn't know what he wants. He is properly shell-shocked, and he's you know, very seriously mentally ill at this point, isn't he? And that's probably an explanation as to why he was taken from the casualty clearing station, which was in France, to first of all London and then Edinburgh to be treated for shell shock. And that cure was successful, but it took some time. So we have a poem called Conscious, about someone who's waking up and having flashbacks of the war, and suffering because of that, and feeling panic-stricken and losing all sense of sort of reality and even what he wants as a person. It's written in third person, isn't it? It's not written in the first person, although it's very likely this actually happened to Owen. I think throughout the poems we never actually see Owen himself confess to being mentally ill. It was something he was very worried about, and many soldiers were, that he would be stigmatised, or he would be branded a sort of loony, a nutter, if he admitted to being mentally ill. It was something that people felt very ashamed about. So he possibly is writing in the third person, in order to distance himself a bit from it. It also gives the poem and many of the other poems a sort of film-like quality, and perhaps what makes his poetry so modern. They are like little scenes from a film. You could imagine, you know, this actually just being filmed, and you could have a soldier waking up in his bed, screaming for the nurse, being disturbed by the flies and the sound of the blind, and then having flashbacks of what's happening in the trench. And you can see, you know, he's written it in that way. Right, you've got to talk about the situations in this poem, the feelings and the language used. Very briefly then, situations. Well, the situation is clear. Someone waking up in a hospital, and remembering a previous situation where he was in the trench and obviously his life was threatened in some sort of way. We never learn what that was, except it's suggested that he saw crimson slaughter. In other words, he saw a bloody death, and that image is important to analyse. Crimson and slaughter. Go away, look up the words, think about them, think about the connotations of the words and what they're trying to suggest. We also have the feelings. Okay, there's a lot of different feelings, I think, evoked in this poem. We get the feelings of his fingers waking up and fluttering, suggesting a sense of hope almost. We get the kind of feeling of him feeling he has to open his eyes with a pull of will. He has to actually really make an effort to open his eyes because he doesn't want to open them. And then we get perhaps the happier feelings of him seeing the mayflowers by his head, but then the change in feeling when he hears the blind cord drawling across the windowsill. You know, he's getting a sense of the world being quite sinister, and then the panic rising as he shouts out for the nurse and doctor, and then the sort of fully fledged flashback to his time in the trench, and he becomes ill, doesn't he? He's cold and hot, he's shivering and he's feverish, isn't he? And then think about the sort of a line like line 15, there's no light to see the voices by. Think about what you feel when you can't, you hear voices but you can't see who the voices are, you know. Is it the enemy? Is it your friends? What's happening? There's a sense of confusion, isn't there? And the language, okay, well, the language at times is very descriptive, isn't it? And quite poetic. The fingers fluttering, the blind cord drawling. But we also have a mixture of sentence structures, and I think the rhythm of the language is important. So think about particularly the last line, and the use of cold. He's cold yet hot. The use of very short, punchy phrases to evoke a sense of panic. And then the longer phrase, and there's no light to see the voices by, and then ... we have what's called an ellipsis, where there's a kind of blank, and you know, words, things are not fully explained. There's a sense of the language being fragmentary, isn't it? It's broken up into little fragments, and those fragments suggest the kind of fragments that are inside the soldier's mind. So think really carefully about the ways in which he uses language, and pick out, you know, at least 5 or 6 sort of uses of language, and explore the connotations of the language and the effect that it has on you. You know, what does it make you think? What does it make you see? What does it make you feel? And the poem's full of visual imagery, isn't it? But it's also full of imagery which creates feelings in the reader. So think about the effects of the language.